This is the new 2024 Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro, and it's an awesome, cool, factory-built off-road pickup truck. It also has a starting price of more than $65,000, which is big money for a Tacoma. Today, I'm going to review the new Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro and show you all of its quirks and features. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. So far, Cars and Bids has sold almost $500 million worth of cars. All sorts of special and cool stuff like this, and this, and this, and this. If you're looking to sell your enthusiast car, reach a vast audience at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new Tacoma TRD Pro, starting with the quirkiest quirk. The front seats have shock absorbers. Your off-road modified truck has shock absorbers? Well, this thing has them in the seats. Now, they're obviously there to help cushion the blow when you're off-roading, going fast on a trail, out in the desert. It keeps you a little bit more comfortable with your shock absorber seats, and you can see they're tremendously adjustable. There's a switch on the bottom that allows you to choose between on-road driving and off-road or trail driving, and you can adjust each shock absorber. There's two on each front seat, and then up at the top of the shock absorbers you can dial in the exact air pressure you want, and there's even a gauge showing the PSI of the shock absorbers for the seats. So you can dial in the firmness or the softness that you specifically want. Amazingly, the seat shock absorbers will also absorb shocks both vertical and horizontal to help keep you more comfortable in off-road or difficult pavement situations. How do they work? More on that in a minute when I get behind the wheel. Now, more quirks and features to come in a second, but first, a little overview on this truck. This is the brand new, fully redesigned Toyota Tacoma, and on previous Tacoma models, the TRD Pro version sat at the top of the off-road lineup. Well, now there's two off-road top-of-the-lineup versions of the Tacoma. There's the TRD Pro, which Toyota says is more for high-speed desert running, and then there's the new Tacoma Trail Hunter, which Toyota says is more for overlanding and more technical off-roading. The two trucks are priced about the same, but you have to kind of choose which version more applies to your situation. I have reviewed the new Tacoma Trail Hunter separately, and I'll link that in the description below. Now, the other big news for the new Tacoma TRD Pro is the powertrain. Gone is last year's V6, replaced instead by a hybrid turbocharged four-cylinder engine, which surely will cause a lot of complaints and consternation. It's a hybrid four-cylinder like a Prius instead of an old V6, but it delivers some pretty good numbers. 325 horsepower, which is impressive, and 465 pound-feet of torque, which is seriously impressive. However, with that said, while the TRD Pro Tacoma used to stand alone as kind of the ultimate mid-sized truck, it now has some pretty big rivals, and probably the biggest is the new Ford Ranger Raptor, which does have a turbo V6 and 405 horsepower, 80 horses more than the 325 in this truck. But with that said, the Ranger Raptor only has 430 pound-feet of torque compared to the 465 pound-feet in the Tacoma TRD Pro. So this truck has more torque, that one has more horsepower. And another advantage the Tacoma has, two places to put the hood prop. You can see one here and one 3 inches away in case you want a slightly different hood angle. Does the Ranger Raptor have that? Of course, that's a joke, but the Ranger Raptor does have one other big advantage over the Tacoma TRD Pro, and that's pricing. This truck starts around $65,500, which frankly is big money for a mid-sized truck. The Chevy Colorado ZR2, the off-roader version of the Colorado, starts around $48,000, a massive price delta. And the Ranger Raptor starts around $57,000, making both of this truck's closest competitors not just cheaper, but considerably cheaper. Toyota is hoping that you'll pay a lot more for, well, in part, the Toyota and TRD Pro brand name. But then again, it's not just the TRD Pro name that you're paying for. This truck also has some pretty big upgrades over a standard Tacoma that make it fairly impressive off the pavement. A very important one is suspension. This truck has some very upgraded suspension parts, as you can tell, including Fox Racing shocks that allow you to dial up manually the firmness and travel of the suspension, which is a pretty cool feature. You also have a new manually disconnecting front stabilizer bar, which can be surprisingly helpful off-road when you need it. And the suspension upgrades add ground clearance to this truck, about 2.5 inches between front and rear for total ground clearance of about 11.5 inches, which is pretty strong for tackling the terrain. Now, Toyota also says that the springs and the anti-roll bars in the TRD Pro have been specifically tuned for high-speed off-road driving. Like I mentioned earlier, the Tacoma Trail Hunter is the one for the low-speed technical stuff, this one for the fast off-roading, and if you do that, you're going to want that, and they've specifically tuned the suspension for that. In fact, this truck even has bump stops equipped in the suspension on the back to try to lessen the impact of some serious off-roading blows when you're flying through the desert at high speed. Also worth pointing out that this truck has an electric locking rear differential standard, also useful when you're on rough terrain, although I should point out that feature is also standard on the TRD off-road model. Not standard on the TRD off-road, these tires, 33-inch Goodyear Wrangler all-terrain tires that can really take you places off the pavement. And while most off-roaders will add steel bumpers to their trucks, this one comes standard with an ARB steel rear bumper, which frankly is pretty cool to see from the factory. You also have recovery hooks mounted in that rear bumper, as you can see, to make it easier to recover others or get recovered in your Tacoma. Also worth pointing out, another benefit of the TRD Pro is this, which is a giant light bar that's integrated into the front grille. Now, this light bar only comes on when you press a button in the interior and when you have your high beams on. But I can tell you, because I have a TRD Pro Sequoia and I got a light bar like this also, it is surprisingly useful and it lights up the world. Speaking of lighting, you also have these cool little TRD Pro markers on the side that add to the sort of specialness of your truck. And there's a lot of other kind of cosmetic TRD Pro stuff that this truck has, like oversized fender flares, as you can see, and some TRD Pro badging. You have it on the side of the hood right here, but most noticeably, you have a TRD Pro badge on the tailgate, which is massive and stamped directly into the tailgate. Makes it huge and very noticeable that you're driving the TRD Pro. And since we're talking tailgate, let's start talking through quirks and features beyond just the TRD Pro stuff, starting with opening the tailgate, which is a rather quirky process. Now, there's a regular tailgate handle here in the middle that you can use to open it. You just stick your finger in here, and then there's an electronic popper. You push it, and the tailgate opens automatically. But that is the boring way to get into the tailgate. The cool way is with these vertical buttons on the side of the taillight. If you press the button, the tailgate will automatically go down. It's not labeled, it's hidden, you wouldn't know it's there, but it works to open the tailgate. And if you press the button when the tailgate is down, guess what? The tailgate automatically rises back up. They have these buttons on either side of the truck, so you can open and close the tailgate without having to go around directly to the center, which is pretty cool. Now, when the tailgate is open, you access the bed, which also has some pretty cool features, including over on the right side, a power outlet so you can, well, power stuff. And over on the left side, you open this panel and discover like a power bank that includes a cigarette lighter style outlet and 2 USB-C ports where you can power even more stuff. Go back over to the other side, you can open this up and you can see there's a little hole there, a little compartment where you can stick stuff if you don't want it in the cabin, but you also don't want it rolling around in the bed. Adds a little practicality. And another helpful item back here is this warning label, which tells you not to put your hand inside the tailgate seam when it's closing. Thank you, Toyota, for that very helpful reminder. I would have forgotten otherwise. But anyway, next we move inside the truck, and actually just opening up the door, you can see the door panel, which has some interesting quirks. For one, you got like 2-level storage here, the upper storage compartment and the lower, which is surprisingly useful. And the door panel trim just looks rugged and cool, like you'd expect from the TRD Pro. In fact, when you get inside, there's a lot of rugged and cool in here. Take a look at the rubber floor mats, which have like tire treads on them and say TRD Pro. They certainly look, well, rugged and cool. Now you move on to the seats and you can see there's this sort of patterned camouflage design, which I have complained about bitterly in my Toyota Sequoia TRD Pro. They've kept it here for the Tacoma, although I have especially complained bitterly in my truck about the camouflage exterior fenders, and guess what? The Tacoma doesn't have them. Someone at Toyota wised up and said this is ugly. They switched to black, but they've kept the camo for the seats, which I suppose I can live with. Now, speaking of the seats, it's worth pointing out these are very sculpted bucket seats that are designed to really kind of keep you in place when you're on the trail and potentially at some fairly severe angles. They're very supportive and reasonably comfortable too. But one interesting thing about the seats is that the backrest is manually operated. Even at a high $60,000 price point, you can see the power control for the backrest is actually a blank switch, and instead it's a manual lever. I assume that has to do with the shock absorbers in the seats. The power control doesn't work with those shock absorbers. Maybe it's too heavy, and so manually operated instead. But on to more rugged stuff in here. How about this giant rubberized grab handle in the center console for the passenger to hold on for dear life when you're doing high-speed desert running? I also like the upright dashboard. There's no curves or lines or flowy designs in here. It's all blocky and square, and you can even see Toyota is printed in giant letters over on the passenger side. It's a little much, but kind of fitting with what this truck is. On the driver's side, the steering wheel is this perforated leather that feels cool to touch. You even have a red centering stripe on the steering wheel, so you can know when you're pointing forward just in your peripheral vision. And you have giant controls to adjust the climate settings, the climate dials, the switches. They're all big, so you could use them with your rugged, manly hands or with gloves. I think that's what they're thinking there. With all of that said, probably the very coolest sort of off-roady feature in this truck is on the dashboard. This speaker is removable. You press the eject button and this JBL speaker comes out and can act as a Bluetooth audio speaker that you can use at a campsite, not just in your truck. Put it back in the truck, in the dash, and then it's just another speaker in your sound system, but it's removable, and that's a pretty cool feature. But even with all the ruggedness, the off-road outdoorsy stuff that this truck has, it's also surprisingly high-tech. For instance, the rear view mirror isn't just a mirror. You flip this switch and it's a camera showing you an image of what's behind you that's being projected from a camera mounted behind the truck. That is a useful tech feature. More obviously, there is a giant screen in the center control stack of the new Tacoma, and frankly, it works great. I have this very same infotainment system in my new Sequoia. I use it all the time. It works fantastically. Very responsive, easy to use, intuitive, well laid out, and adaptive to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto wirelessly and flawlessly. It all works really well. Probably the best new feature in this truck is the gauge cluster screen, which is really excellent. Also have this in my Sequoia, but nowhere near as configurable as Toyota has now made it on the new Tacoma. You can have it display all sorts of things like your audio, which I can't see see in my truck, your navigation and various different pieces of information you might want to see. Plus, there are several different dial displays that you can choose from, including smart and tough, depending on exactly who you think you are. It's just a really good, excellent, configurable gauge cluster display system. Beyond all that, this truck also comes with adaptive cruise control that'll regulate its speed based on vehicles in front. And not just that, but it also has an auto steering system that frankly does a pretty good job of, well, automatically steering for you as long as you have a hand left on the wheel to let the truck know you're paying attention. You also have some nice off-road tech equipment. You can see this little dial here, which is a very unusual four-wheel drive dial. To put it into four-wheel drive, you press this button on the side and then twist the base of the dial from 2H to 4H to 4L. It's kind of a weird operation. But more importantly, above that, you can see this dial will adjust your drive mode or your multi-terrain select system, where you can tell the truck you're driving on sand or rocks or gravel or whatever, and it will adjust the computers, the suspension, the wheel travel, etc. to tailor to that specific type of surface. You can also use this to turn on your crawl control, which is a fantastic off-roading feature this truck offers. And you also have an off-road cruise control system here too. And one other nice luxury touch, a heated steering wheel. Press this button, it turns on, and just adds to the fun or the comfort in the Tacoma. And then there's the back seat. And comfort is not exactly a word I would use to describe life back here. Given this vehicle's overall size, the back seats are tight. There's not that much space for legroom and knee room, and the cool shock absorbers in the front seat definitely make it worse. You can see where the front seats would normally end, and then the shock absorbers are tacked on beyond that to make a more comfortable ride for the front seat people, but to make a less comfortable ride for people in back. There's really not as much room back here as, frankly, there should be. Now, with that said, there are some niceties in the back of this truck. You have cup holders built into your door panel, which is nice, and additional cup holders in the back of the front center console, which is doubly nice. You also have power ports back here, 2 USB-C, and a regular household outlet power port, which is a cool feature to see in the interior of a vehicle like this. It's very useful in a lot of situations. But unfortunately, one thing you don't have is climate vents, which isn't tremendously common in the backseat for mid-size pickup trucks, but given the price point here, I'd love to see rear seat climate vents in this truck. You also do have an opening rear window in the Tacoma, but it doesn't go all the way down like it does in the Tundra and the 4Runner. Instead, only a small opening in the center, which frankly isn't quite as cool. These back seats are fine, but they're not a great place to spend time, and certainly not a particularly comfortable or luxurious experience like you might expect given the size of this truck, its competition, and its price point. But you're probably more interested in how this truck drives. So next, let's get the new TRD Pro Tacoma out on the road and find out. All right, driving the new Tacoma TRD Pro. I've been very excited about this as a TRD Pro man myself with my Sequoia TRD Pro. I've been excited to check out the Tacoma basically ever since they announced it. The styling is a little bit over the top for some, but I think it looks cool. I think they're really embracing what this truck is all about. And I know that the price tag is a lot for some, but I also think Toyota was really annoyed that these trucks were flipping for so much more money in the aftermarket years ago. You know, when they first came out, Toyota was like, we're gonna go get the profits for ourselves. And so it's funny, everybody balks at a $65,000, $70,000 Tacoma, but that's what people were paying for them before. It just was happening in the third-party world, not at the dealer world. Now Toyota's like, we're gonna go get that money. Okay, so a couple things worth talking about. And the first thing I want to discuss is these seats. They're obviously ridiculous. I showed them to you before. The question you're gonna have is, do they actually do anything? Do they have any impact on the driving experience? And the answer is yes and no. It depends on really what you're looking for. A truck like this is sort of inherently unsettled. Being a body-on-frame vehicle, cab and bed is always going to have kind of ride quality issues. It's hard to make a vehicle like that be super comfortable, and this truck is the same way. The seats don't change that. Like, it still has a pretty unsettled ride. When you go over bumps, when you go over potholes, it still has a tendency to feel like unsettled, not very smooth, not tremendously like planted. It's just the nature of a truck. What the seat does is it kind of smooths out those bumps a little bit. It sort of dulls the pain, if you will. So you still have the pain in the sense that you still have the bumps, you still feel them happening, as I'm doing right now. It's just that you feel them a little bit smoother. So if you're buying this truck thinking, oh, the seats make it so that it feels like riding on a cloud and it eliminates the problems that trucks have in terms of ride quality, that's not true, and that's not going to be the situation. But what you are going to see is like those bumps may be a little bit more comfortable. They still happen to the exact same degree as before, but they definitely feel a little bit smoother. That's what the seats do. The other big thing that everybody's going to want to know about with this truck is the powertrain. And I'm sorry, I'm not one of the haters. Everybody wants to be a hater about these powertrains. People look at the fact that a small number of non-hybrid Tundras were recalled, and they're like, these powertrains are trash, you can't do anything with them. The truth is, I got the Turbo V6 in my Sequoia. I think it is a fantastic powertrain, and this is also absolutely wonderful. This turbo hybrid four-cylinder is a really great engine. It sounds good. It has a lot of power where it counts. It feels like it has a lot of torque. It feels like it has a lot of muscle. And honestly, truly and honestly, all the people who are complaining, I bet you if I put them in this truck and told them that they didn't know that it had a four-cylinder, they would guess that it has a V6. Toyota just does these kinds of powertrains well. They've refined hybrid technology a lot over the years. Turbocharging is not a new thing. Like, this truck has been well refined and well figured out, this powertrain, and it does a great job in this truck. Is it going to be long-term reliable like the old 4-liter engine? I don't know, and that's a potentially valid complaint. But people who are already casting it aside, I think, is just laughable complainism. Like, you don't know anything, you know? And by the way, in my experience, people always judge the new technology harshly. You know, when the Land Cruiser went from a 6-cylinder to a V8, there was a lot of complaints there. This engine just does what it needs to do, and it doesn't just motivate this truck, it makes this truck legitimately seem fast, which I think is something that is basically necessary for, you know, a TRD Pro, especially at this price point. During the test that I have for this vehicle, I'm not going to be able to take it, you know, off-roading on some really hardcore terrain, but I think it's important to point out that, you know, the majority of buyers of these vehicles don't really do that, or if they do, they don't do it for the majority of the time. And so I think there are a lot of people interested in how the truck, you know, drives on the road. I think it really does live up to the TRD Pro name that they've sort of created and made for themselves over the last 10 years. Whether it's worth the price tag when you have an also very competent Ranger Raptor and Colorado ZR2 in the world for a lot less money, you know, that's something that people are going to decide. But I have a suspicion that they will decide that it is worth the price tag, that this truck will still sell in strong numbers, and that it's going to be a popular truck that is still very desirable, that holds its value well, and that people can use to, you know, have fun and take on the trails. And so that's the new 2024 Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro. This truck is a legend, the TRD Pro. Everybody in the truck and SUV off-road space wants one, and Toyota knows that, which is why this is now so expensive. This truck is cool, desirable, capable, awesome, but it's big money for a Tacoma. Is it worth it? Well, let's find out in the DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 54 out of 100, which puts the Tacoma TRD Pro here against rivals. This truck is cool, with great performance, neat styling, some awesome off-road tricks. It really has a lot to offer, but how do you choose it over the Ford Ranger Raptor, which has way more power for way less money and similar capabilities, tech, and sizing? You have to really love the Toyota brand, and frankly, a lot of people do. I don't think Toyota will have much trouble selling these, but I personally would probably end up in a Ranger Raptor.